Jolls with RDA Impact, and David Luehr, owner of Elite Body Shop Solutions, is your presenter today. The webinar will take approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and we are recording it, and we'll post it on our website as well as put it on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat box at the bottom right of the screen, and David will address them at the end of the presentation. Now I'll turn it over to David.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys having me back. So I'm sure most of you guys can relate to this story. You go to NACE or SEMA, you learn something new and you're excited and you can't wait to get back to the shop and start implementing things. Only when you do, and instead of getting enthusiasm from your crew, you're met with resistance instead. So for example, you learned a new check-in procedure that'll help you with communication and help with missed damage at your shop. But as you start to explain it to your crew, you hear things like, "I don't know, Dave. I don't think we have time for this." So you counter with a well-timed verbal volley and you explain all the benefits of performing the check-in process with the customers. And then finally, your staff gives in and says, "Okay, Dave, we'll do it." So in your mind, you're thinking, yes, and you secretly give a little fist pump and you think to yourself, man, I could sell ice to an Eskimo. The only problem is, a couple of days later, you notice that your estimator Bob seems to have forgotten all about your powerful little conversation you had with him, and he's no longer checking in cars. So what the heck happened here? The problem is what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to tell you about some of my personal experiences of being an implementer. For over 30 years I've been involved in this business. I'm going to show you how to leverage a few vital behaviors to maximize your change efforts, and I'll share with you the 6 sources of influence that have been used by the world's best influence masters to conquer some of the world's most pervasive problems, and that you can also use to implement lean or other change efforts at your shop or even in your personal life. Over my years in this industry, I have been everything from a teenage floor sweeper to a painter, business owner, and I've been charged of running operations, both small and very large collision businesses. So now, as the owner and lead mentor for Elite Body Shop Solutions, I spend most of my time helping collision businesses understand the forces behind their shop's resistance to this change. There are a couple places that allowed me to learn these skills. In the early 2000s, the world's largest auto auction company, Mannheim, was experiencing a decline in their wholesale reconditioning work at their massive body shops. And these guys had shops that, you know, I think the average one's probably close to 60,000 square feet. They were monsters. Mannheim decided that it wanted to enter the space of retail collision, and they spent millions of dollars doing so. The only problem was that the people in these shops didn't know anything about the retail side of the business. It was completely foreign to these people. Mannheim spared no expense. They spent millions on new equipment and hired top talent to implement some of the most cutting-edge lean processes to over 20 of the 80 body shops that they had in the U.S. Not only were these auction people not interested in retail, they didn't even report to me or the other operations guys. So much of the influencing had to be done through auction general managers and in some cases even labor unions. It was one of the most difficult challenges of my career, but my team had many successes and we were able to overcome major obstacles by figuring out new and better ways to influence people to do things they didn't originally want to do. So then in 2010, I was hired by a man named Philip Bradshaw of Bradshaw Collision Centers in Nashville, and Philip was a very well-known operator. Some of you guys may have known Philip over the years, but he had successfully operated a collision business in Nashville since 1967. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of old culture involved in this place. Philip was wise enough to know, however, that he needed to change and apply modern lean techniques to his 4 locations in order to continue his dominance in the market. So he hired me to be his, what he called, lean process manager. And despite Philip's desire to implement modern process, he was also my biggest obstacle, as it turns out, much of the time, and he had a difficult time accepting much of the lean thinking. An example of this would be, one of the first things I had to do in order to improve cycle time at the shops was to work on WIP management. The store managers had always been taught to grab the keys, so every location always had cars that were sitting around for long periods of time. So getting Philip and the staff to buy into a better scheduling practice and reducing the mountain of cars that were piled up behind the shop, it was a difficult task. And for the technicians, that mountain of cars also represented job security, so it was a very difficult sell. And if that wasn't tough enough, the next thing I did was work on blueprinting and a little thing called production-ready criteria. So this meant that after a car was blueprinted, the techs were not allowed to pull the car into their stalls to begin work until all of the critical parts were on hand first. So this one got me called up to the Godfather's office. He didn't understand that at all. But in the end, I was able to persevere, and Bradshaw's experienced 20% growth, profit soared, cycle time improved. So then we were able to buy store number 5. The store's in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's about 30 miles south of Nashville, but it might as well have been 30,000 miles. This place was a completely different culture than what we were used to. The outside of the building may look modern, but inside it was scary. The median age of the technicians in this place was around 60 years old. Everybody got their own frame rack, as you can see in the picture, and it was full of frame racks, and every one of these racks had a mountain of cigarette butts under them that we had to clean up. So the Bradshaw culture was very professional. Employees are required to wear safety glasses and are definitely not allowed to smoke in the shop. This is going to be a rough transition. So despite massive resistance that would last for months and an unwanted OSHA inspection and many other obstacles, within weeks we had it looking like this. Not too bad, I'd say. Then this happened. On a Friday evening, about 30 people from Abra descended on Nashville, and by Monday morning the whole company had become an Abra. It was impressive to watch, but it was a little painful for me to watch all my hard work, literally being thrown into dumpsters. I was fortunate, however, to stay on with Abra long enough to learn their systems and the things that allow consolidators to grow so fast. After all, it's all part of the journey, right? So the big takeaway here is that much like over at Mannheim, my time spent at Bradshaw's was that no one reported directly to me. Philip was adamant that everyone reported to his son Anthony. So again, I was forced to figure out ways to get people to do the right things without using authority to get it done. So think about that for a minute. How different would you run your company if you could not use your authority as your primary tool for motivating people? So whether you realize it or not, there's a multitude of factors that are causing your failure or hopefully success in implementing change. The problem, most of us limit our beliefs by thinking that when people are resistant to our requests, it's because that person is either a bad listener or simply a bad person. But the reality is that there are many things going on that most of us don't even think about, and it's usually because of the world you have created around yourself and your employees. And we're going to explore that a little bit in a minute. At its most basic level, when you ask somebody to do something, they unconsciously will ask themselves 2 things before deciding if they want to do it or not. First of all, will it be worth it? Am I motivated to do it, right? And the second thing is, will I be able to perform the task? Do I have the necessary skills or not? This brings us to what is called the influencer model, and I took this model from a book called Influencer, and I'll give you a little more information on that in a little bit too. It's the new leading science of change. This model requires 3 steps. First of all, obviously, you need to know what you want to achieve. What are we trying to change here? And how are we going to measure it? That's important as well. Then we've got to figure out what are the vital behaviors, what are the few things that we need to focus on that are going to lead to the greatest amount of change. And then lastly, we need to know how to use the 6 sources of influence to motivate and enable that change. So you'll notice that the 6 sources of influence is divided by motivation and ability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So this is the model that influence masters have used to fix some of the world's most persistent problems, whether it's fixing an AIDS epidemic in Thailand or just trying to get implementing a blueprinting program at your shop. This is how it's done. So how do we do this, and how do we measure it? So you simply figure out what it is that you're trying to change and how you're going to measure it. So since this is a topic that most of us are familiar with, I'll use blueprinting as an example. So let's say that we want to implement a blueprinting program because we want to increase throughput and profitability. And then we figure out a few ways to measure that. Simple enough. Step 2 is we've got to identify and find the vital behaviors. So we call these steps or tasks vital behaviors, and as you know, there are many steps involved in blueprinting a vehicle. There are, however, only a few what I consider vital behaviors that are going to determine your overall success or failure. These high leverage behaviors are the ones that you'll want to focus on. So how do we find these vital behaviors? There are actually several ways, whether you use research that's already been done for you, such as, if you were trying to lose weight, science has already proven that the vital behaviors are eat less and exercise more. You can also run mini experiments to see what works best for you and your company, or you can use my favorite method, which is learning from positive deviance. So if you're struggling to implement blueprinting at your shop, but a friend's shop has a very successful blueprinting program, chances are they're doing many of the same things as you, but there are probably a couple of key things that they are doing that's allowing them to be successful. So it becomes your job to identify these positive, deviant, vital behaviors. So here's an example of the vital behaviors that I've identified over the years. These have been practiced in the real world and put in the form of a 10-step sheet, as I like to call it. So basically, if the disassembly tech follows the 10 steps on the left, which are vital behaviors, and your blueprint analyst or your estimator, depending on what you call them at your facility, follows the 10 steps on repair plan, you're going to be successful on every repair job. So we've identified the vital behaviors, whether it's blueprinting like in this example, or check-in, or any other process that you might want to implement, or whether it's a personal habit that you're trying to overcome. Now that we have identified the vital behaviors necessary, we can begin to look at the 6 sources of influence needed to get people to perform the vital behaviors. So source 1 is the most common. Your job in source 1 is to get people to do what they currently hate doing, or at least perceive they will hate to do. So you see, your yes means nothing if they don't have the ability to say no. Often when people agree to do something you've asked them to do, it's because they want you to shut up. So they actually perform what you ask once or twice, but the first chance they get to quit performing the vital behavior, they will, because they're not committed to the yes. Using our mouth as a motivator is the most popular choice because it's convenient. We carry our mouths with us everywhere, and it actually works a great deal of the time. However, when it comes to persistent problems, verbal persuasion rarely works. In fact, nagging usually makes things worse and causes people to want to perform the vital behaviors even less. I wish my wife understood this. A method I like to use is what coaches and therapists call motivational interviewing. Instead of barking commands at your people, you ask questions so that the person can decide on their own if it'll be worth it and if they're going to be able. The truth is, quite often, we all want the same things. Hard work pays off in the future. Laziness pays off now. So humans are actually very bad at predicting what they will like or dislike. Sometimes you just need to get people to experience the vital behaviors. Quite often the activity is not nearly as bad as they think. If actually trying out the vital behavior is impossible, you can always go on a field trip. So when I was working at Mannheim, I was working on a cutting-edge linear flow production model. I know that sounds fancy. In Nashville, and I was being met with a lot of resistance. And a lot of it was being generated by one individual, a body man named Kevin. Now, Kevin was a big, intimidating guy, and he was also very vocal with his opinions. But despite being a big blowhard, he was actually a very productive technician, and the rest of the crew kind of looked up to him. So I'd been reading an article about a shop in California that was running the same type of linear model, and I got an idea. So Kevin and I flew out to Cali for a couple days to check out this amazing shop, and Kevin got to see firsthand and talk to the technicians in person. It worked brilliantly. So Kevin became a raving advocate for the new system, and we did it by going on a field trip. So because Kevin wasn't my only point of resistance, I still had 10 other locations to try to roll this out in. And I couldn't possibly take all these people to California with me, so I had to figure out how to create a vicarious experience for them. And I was able to do this by creating a poignant story about Kevin and my trip, and I created a PowerPoint presentation with photos and was able to get people's attention that way. The use of storytelling is a much better way to connect with people's values and their intrinsic motivators than the use of throwing data and opinions at them. I'm sure you guys have, and then lastly, make it a game. I'm sure you guys have heard of that game everybody seems to be playing on their iPhones called Candy Crush. Why the heck would anyone spend countless hours playing that stupid mundane game Candy Crush? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. It's because it's a game, and you get to know what the score is. So think about how you guys might be able to turn your vital behaviors into a game. It just might help. Source 2, personal ability. This is the side where we help people answer the question, can I do it? We've all talked about our own and others' willpower as being a determining factor of whether vital behaviors get done consistently. But what many of us don't know is that science has proven over and over again, and this is good news for most of us, is that willpower is not something you're either just born with or without. Willpower is actually a skill that can be learned. So most of the time, breakdowns in our processes occur in only a handful of small, crucial moments that occur throughout the day. So for example, let's say your parts guy, Bill, is supposed to open all the boxes and mirror match the parts on every car, but today things are really busy and he's dealing with a lot of problems. So what is going on in Bill's mind at that moment when faced with the question, do I open the boxes and mirror match all these parts, or do I attend to Carl, the impatient estimator's plea to source a used quarter panel for a car coming in on Monday? The real question here is, how is Bill's mind trained to deal with these situations? It's just something for you to think about. Have you ever hired an employee with over 20 years of experience and he or she seemed no better than your 5-year guy? Why is that? This is actually quite common, and the reason for it is called arrested development. In many trades, including ours, people learn enough to become proficient, and then they just quit learning. You would think that an estimator that had been writing estimates over and over and over again for years and years would keep improving, but they don't. This is also true in sports. I've been playing tennis for almost 4 years now, and I'm beating players that have been playing for 10 to 20 years or more. And you can trust me when I say I was not born with some gift. The real key here is that those guys practice. When they practice stuff they've already mastered, like just hitting the ball the same way every time. When a top tennis pro practices, he works on developing skills that he's yet to master. The reason this is important to our discussion today, guys, is that when we're implementing new modern processes, quite often we assume people have the skills necessary to be successful, and quite often they just don't. If you want to be a top pro in any calling, it's best to invest in a coach. Source 3, social motivation, providing encouragement. No source of influence is more powerful than the social networks that exist in our shops. What your people think of you as a leader and what people think of each other in the shop is absolutely critical to your success as an influence master. If you've not been able to establish trust and loyalty amongst your people, then you might as well give up on your implementation plans, because it'll fail every time. Learn to use modern leadership techniques like the ones my company teaches, and you can soon have a social culture that will allow you to implement things at lightning speed. Engage opinion leaders. An opinion leader is someone at your shop, and this is one of my favorite techniques, by the way, that he's either a respected leader or he's an employee that almost everyone else respects and looks up to. So remember my story about Kevin and the California trip? Why do you think I chose him to take to California? I like to start by getting the company's opinion leaders over to my way of thinking, and then quite often the rest of the crew just follows along. Problem solved. Conversely, on occasion you'll have on occasion you'll manage to get most everybody on board with your new process, and you still have one or two that are resisting you. Often these people will cave to peer pressure from the other employees that at this point they really want to do things the right way. So moving on to source 4, social ability. In source 4, we ensure that your social network has the ability to make change happen. They are motivated now. Now we need to give them the skills and the ability to succeed. Almost no body shop I have visited has purposefully engaged all of their employees in interpersonal skills like you would see at larger corporations. But wow, when shops do, what a difference it makes. I think that because so many of us are stuck in a body shop mentality, that soft skills are often viewed as unnecessary, and in some cases we might even think they're silly. But I will tell you that having the skills to communicate with one another and navigating tricky behavioral problems is what will differentiate your business more than any other skill I know of. You also want to make sure that people know how and when to ask for help. Like in my earlier example, Bill the parts guy was faced with a dilemma due to time pressure that could potentially cause him to skip a vital behavior and not mirror match those parts. Leaders need to coach their people how specifically they need to ask for help. Source 5 is called structural motivation, using such things as money to inspire motivation. The biggest myth, however, is that money is always a motivator. That is simply not true. In fact, I've seen many cases where throwing money at a problem actually was a demotivator. I urge you, don't use incentives to compensate for your failure to engage personal or social motivation. In other words, if you stink as a leader, throwing money at a person to get them to change will have temporary results at best. You must first have established trust and loyalty, and only then will small rewards become beneficial. I also recommend that you look at your incentive programs carefully and make sure that make sure you're incentivizing the right things. If you hand out bonuses for outcome measurements such as cycle time, things of that nature, you need to make sure that the person actually has full control of the outcome. I prefer rewarding people for doing a great job of performing the vital behaviors, such as following the 10-step blueprinting steps, as an example. If they perform vital behaviors, the outcomes will take care of themselves. Now, source 6 is my favorite of the 6 sources, and I've used it successfully over the years. When you spend as much time in a shop as many of you do, you tend to kind of overlook your environment and how it can affect your motivation, your team's motivation, and abilities to enact the vital behaviors. They say a fish is the last one to discover it's in water. It's important for you guys to become aware and look at your shop and office layouts in a different way. You might be shocked at what you discover. So here's an example of that. The scenario in the picture on the left, we had a shop was complaining that communication was horrible at this shop, and the production manager's office was located up front by the sales staff. So we simply moved his office in the middle of the shop. Communication problem solved, right? Another technique that we like to use is we built an office on wheels because we discovered that one of the vital behaviors of writing an accurate blueprint is that we can't jot notes down on the back of a napkin and march it back up to the front office and expect it to be accurate. That's not really blueprinting. So by having a computer in an office, it removes all excuses of why it can't be done out there. That'll ensure the vital behaviors get enacted. Change your space. So, you know, in the late 90s, I worked for Love Grove Collision out in Oregon for several years, a great company. And we were growing fast. We all worked in the same kind of little office area, and we were always kind of overhearing each other's conversations. But our customer communication was awesome. Our communication between each other was awesome. But we continued to grow, so we built a new office across the street, and we're all excited as we finally get our new offices. Well, guess what happened to communication? That's right, it absolutely plummeted. So do you have a problem with getting your parts carts kitted properly? Try moving your clip bins over to the same area where you're disassembling the cars, and also you'll notice in the photo that there's that we keep our fluids. We actually kit the parts cart while we're disassembling the car instead of on Friday when we're trying to put the car back together. This is just another little trick I've learned that really helps motivate people to do the right things. So, Bill the parts guy again. Do you think he's going to mirror match parts if he's got to dig through that pile to find the old ones? Probably not, right? You got to make it easy. Now Bill's chances of mirror matching those parts skyrockets. Make it unavoidable. So if you've got a problem with people not following procedures, try a linear production model like the picture on the right. Imagine what would happen if they skipped blueprinting steps in that scenario. It would cause quite a problem, wouldn't it? So sometimes you can actually create disciplines in how you set up your shop. I'm not suggesting that you go out and create a linear flow model, but I'm just trying to make a point here. So let's recap real quick. We've got 6 sources: motivation, personal, make the undesirable desirable; personal ability, overinvest in building skills; social motivation, number 3, harness peer pressure; number 4, find strength in numbers; number 5, structural motivation, design rewards and demand accountability; source 6, structural ability, change your environment. See, influencers succeed where the rest of us fail because they over-determine success. They marshal a critical mass of all 6 sources of influence to make change inevitable. So my rule of thumb is I always use at least 4, preferably 6, but I always use at least 4 on any implementation that I'm doing. So these are a couple books that are on my recommended reading list. Influencer. If you want to know how to talk to one another, Crucial Conversations will change your life, and so will Crucial Accountability. It takes the concepts from Crucial Conversations and applies it in how you keep your people accountable at work. These are all written by the same authors who are actually scientists, but I highly recommend that. I'm going to leave that slide up for just a second for you to write those down, or you can email me and I will happily send you a link to where you can find these books. So let's take some questions.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? And I just also want to follow up by saying I will send out David's information to everybody, and if you have anything that comes up later, you can follow up with him. And also, don't forget, we're recording everything, so you can go back and watch this webinar again or show it to other people.
Yep, so if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you guys. If you have questions we didn't answer here today, feel free to email me. Melissa said she'd send you my contact information. Also, if you'd like more information on how Elite Body Shops solutions can help you, by providing modern leadership or lean process skills, we'd love to hear from you as well. Please give me a call, no obligation whatsoever.
Okay, we have a question.
Yes.
How do you implement change in a shop where the owner is in the way of that change?
Yeah, that's a good one. The book Crucial Conversations, read it. In order for you to have any success in that type of a difficult environment, you've got to know how to talk openly and safely with your superiors. Sometimes can be a scary thing to do, but if you truly care about the organization and you've got plans how you can help to make it better, they've got to listen. If they don't, you might be in the wrong place. Hopefully that answered the question.
I don't see any others. If anybody has any, give them a minute and type them in.
Yeah, that's a situation I've encountered several times. In fact, it can be very frustrating, especially I've worked for a lot of family-owned businesses, and where there's one in particular that comes to mind where actually the manager of the shop is like the only administrative person that isn't a member of the family. So imagine his difficulty trying to get things done. So he's got his hands full with that situation, but it can be done. Just you got to get really good at mastering your communication skills.
Well, I don't see any other questions. So again, we'll follow up with everybody who's on the presentation, and we'll give them your information. And everyone, please continue to send your suggestions for future ideas for webinars, and we'll be in touch and let you know what's coming available for you. Thanks, David.
Thank you, everybody.